Rick, good morning. How are we?
Good morning, brother. Yeah, doing really well.
Excellent, excellent. So you started a business at 14 years old, and it wasn't selling Galaxy bars from your locker to other students. Talk us through what compelled you to commit to something so intimidating at such a young age. Where did that spark come from?
I haven't been asked this question before. Yeah, the spark, I think, came from the fact that I didn't think it was a big deal. Like, I didn't really think about creating a business. If I wind back to where I was at that time, I was just deeply passionate about video games. I was playing Halo 1, Halo 2, Halo 3, pretty intensely. And yeah, it was just my passion. This was kind of pre-esports era. In fact, it was the beginning of the esports era. Some of my teammates actually, after I quit playing and moved on to get a proper job, became some of the first millionaire gamers ever from Twitch when it first came out. But yeah, I'm basically 14. I'm just deeply passionate about video games. And I was doing some self-hypnosis at the time. Paul McKenna, if you're familiar with him, but he's a famous hypnotist.
Was he the one that looked after Johnny Wilkinson? Am I right in saying?
Yeah, he might be. Yeah. He's
he's got
celebrity clientele and everything. And yeah, my mum had some of his success tapes under the old hi-fi unit. Is it a hi-fi? Wi-Fi. What do you call those old systems?
I think hi-fi. Hi-fi sounds right. The big,
yeah.
the wooden with the speaker boxes. That thing. Hi-fi. I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's been a while. So beneath that, there was some drawers, and there was these success tapes by Paul McKenna. So I was just interested. I was curious as a kind of 14-year-old, and just started listening to these every single night before I went to bed. And it was around that time. I don't know for sure that the two are related, but I sense, understanding what I understand about psychology now, that it's probable. And I just had this idea. I was like, wow, why don't I get my team sponsored? I mean, I can see that Dr. Pepper is sponsoring some of the big competitions. I was like, why don't I get my team sponsored? So I went to the local corner store. I bought one of those £5 at the time gift cards where you could phone internationally, so it didn't cost my mum, hundreds, as I was about to phone all of these kind of US companies. I went onto Google and I was top 100 energy drinks companies, clicked enter. This massive big list came up, and I just started going through the list and calling all of these companies, being like, I've got a gaming team, one of the best in the world. Dr. Pepper's sponsoring the event. Would you be up for sponsoring us? And I think it was the sixth or seventh guy. I mean, the story would be way cooler if it was the 106th person. I think it was the sixth or seventh person. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, wow, that was really easy. And it turns out there was a band called Breaking Benjamin, who were a platinum selling band, who actually played
Diary of Jane and everything.
Yeah. They were also sponsored by this company called Liquid Lightning. And therefore they already knew about Halo. So I didn't have to set a lot of context. They were Halo aware. And from there, we got our team sponsored. We flew around the world. We got everything paid for. And then we started doing gaming lessons online, teaching other kids how to play Halo at a higher level.
So it wasn't an accident. It was a very intentional set of phone calls, but there were no. You're right. The story would have been, in many ways, you could have pulled more lessons from it if it was I had to tolerate rejection. I had to deal with this. I learned this along the way, but it was essentially just a optimistic bunch of kids doing something that they loved, which in many ways is actually the best answer to that question there possibly could be, because that is what draws people to following their passions in the first place. So the next couple of years were fairly roller coastery, weren't they, in terms of the journey that unfolded? And I know obviously it was just before Twitch started to become a thing, so you were navigating a bit of a market that won't be as familiar to anyone that's sort of aware of the space now. So talk us through 14 to 19, I guess, is the key detail here in terms of the journey that you as an individual went on. What was it like?
So as I'm going through that, obviously my parents are seeing this and they don't see the industry that I'm seeing. And at the time, I didn't have enough confidence in myself in regards to life experience to recognize I was witnessing an emerging market. So I listened to my parents' advice. I'm kind of happy I did now, but I mean, there was definitely some parts of me after I saw some of my teammates becoming super successful, I was a bit frustrated about. But it was also a beautiful life lesson, and recognizing that sometimes what we see as individuals is not what other people can see. Just like right now if you're interested in investments in crypto, you're probably seeing a world that if you try and explain it to your parents or your grandparents, it's going to be very confusing. But if you understand how, money and systems and value works, then it starts to make a lot of sense in the age that we're living in. So we're always living in these different perspectives, and my parents were living in a different perspective, as many of our parents would have been in that time. And yeah, just from that space, I kind of listened to them and kind of left my passion, if you will, which was just everything was coming very easily. And I found that to be true when I'm following what I love doing, when I'm really just mostly passionate about it. Beautiful relationships, connections, and the effort and energy just starts to move very naturally. So I kind of like leave that behind. And I just, I kind of like, I end up living with a death metal band in Newcastle, in Heaton. And yeah, I just like become like a kind of like death metal, kind of like rock and roll, indie music, just like parties, festival, lots of drugs. And it kind of just like set my life up to be heading in like a not so great direction. And things were looking pretty bleak in regards to like life path forward as I was kind of in that space.
All at a very young age as well, which is the key detail, I guess, in terms of you've already referenced the lack of life experience. I mean, when we're 16, we think we know everything, don't we? But we very much do not. And I think going through that journey, being catapulted into it with probably a bit more disposable than anyone else at that age would have had, in an environment where everything's new, everything's novel, everything's exciting, I can imagine you learnt a lot about yourself quickly. And 19, there was a pivotal moment where everything changed, wasn't there?
Yeah, 19. Again, we're just having like, I mean, it was a blast if I actually look back now. I'm like, but also there was just like, there was a lot of dysfunction inside of it as well. So I'm multiple parties. I mean, like everything was on the table most nights, from, MDMA, cocaine, ketamine, ecstasy, speed. As people were smoking heroin. I mean, there was a full spectrum in terms of what were happening at the parties. And yeah, one night, I'd taken a cocktail of many different things and had a near-death experience. I felt like I was actually dying, and it was terrifying. I remember sitting on the sofa, just like feeling like my body was dying, feeling like this was the kind of final moments of my life. And I was just having all of these just like huge epiphany moments as I was kind of like accepting, oh my God, like I overdid it. I did too much. I took my life for granted. I took my friends for granted. I took my family for granted. I haven't shown up in the way that I wanted to for my life. And I was having to reckon with all of those things, which I'd never had to do before. I'd never really sat and contemplated how precious this life really is, and how precious the opportunities and my relationships and everything really are. So I was like going through a massive reconciliation with all of that as if it was about to end. That was the experience. I wasn't aware of what was happening. And I just accepted. I was like, okay, cool. That was it. And I mean, there's a lot of grief inside of that. And then the next thing, my alarm clock's going off, just like beep, 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 beep. The sun's coming through the window. And I never felt so much joy in my life. I mean, I'd taken a lot of ecstasy, but this still didn't even compare. This was like natural joy and just the deepest gratitude to be alive. I'm just like, wow. And I just felt like I had this second chance, and I'm kind of like walking around the house and people are lying about, sleeping on corridors and stuff. And I'm just like delighted. I'm like, I'm alive. And people probably still think I'm high. And it was just a pivotal moment for me. I was like, okay, cool. I need to change my life. I need to leave this current situation that I'm in. God bless everyone, but I need to start getting my life in order and, really taking and not taking for granted the life that I have. And yeah, I moved out of that house, and the journey went from there.
What were you immediately drawn to with that natural energy, high gratitude? What were the things that your psyche led you to as this is what intrinsically I want to and feel like I should be doing? Where do I want my life to go? What direction should I be moving in? Or did you just kind of bask in the sensation of that epiphany moment?
I think I enjoyed the epiphany for 2 or 3 hours and then came back down to reality a little bit. And inside of that, I was just, based on my development at the time, I was really looking, okay, cool. Like, what do I need to do here? I'm lacking meaning in my life. I'm lacking discipline. I'm hanging around with people who aren't maybe super amazing people, but just aren't supportive for, building a kind of like healthy, happy, fulfilling life. But the main thing was just like, I'm disorganized and I'm not prioritizing the things that are important to build a life. So in that moment, I'm like, okay, cool. What can I do here? So the two things that came to mind at that time were, I need to go to the gym and get disciplined, and I'm going to join the army. I'm going to join the Royal Marines. So I go to the Royal Marines office in Newcastle, and I join the local gym. And I just put all of, I guess, like the energy of being 19, 20 years old into that. And I mean, at this point, I hadn't recognized and reconciled the fact that all of this energy was coming from the fact that there were things that had happened in my life that were causing a deep stress response in my system. So I was in like a survival mode. And the reason that I was reaching for drugs and these types of things was to kind of mitigate the internal stress and friction that I was feeling in my own, inner world, my own psyche. And I just hadn't found that yet. So I was just finding all of the ways upon which I could channel my energy more skillfully, as opposed to into drugs and chaos. Now I put it into work and the gym. As I'm applying for the Royal Marine Commandos, as I'm kind of going through that process, I'm having to reconcile. Like, I'm not sure that I believe in. Now, I mean, I think the military has a place, but in terms of what was happening on the political sphere and just generally, I was just like, I'm not sure I fully align with the motivations of where things are going. And I also not sure how I feel about killing another human being. I mean, I was having to wrestle with that. And I was like, I don't want to do that. So I put all my energy into the gym. And as I'm going into that, it kind of becomes my passion. And then through that, I start to see some gaps in the market in terms of the fitness industry, of which then form kind of, I guess, my first real business.
So you mentioned fulfillment in there. A happy, fulfilled life, I think was the phrase that you use. And that's ultimately the center of what you focus on now. What I know is a huge part of what you conscientiously want to achieve and really put front and center. So what does it mean to you? What does fulfillment mean to you at this point? I know a lot of time has passed since where we just sort of ended things chronologically there, but we'll unpack a little bit of how you've learned those lessons. But what does a happy, fulfilled life look like to you now?
Well, just to fill in the story, because we've been doing it in chronological order, what I was really learning there, and I mean, I built a business. It was called Protein Discount Card. We were the largest affiliate for all of the top fitness and supplement brands in the UK. And we also had some other businesses, a fitness competition and these types of things as well. We're at all the big expo events and those types of stuff. It was awesome, beautiful journey. And what I was learning inside of that was not actually about happiness and fulfillment, albeit it was through its opposite. I was learning about the science of achievement. So, I was in a disorganized place and I had to learn how to get my life in order. So I had to learn how achievement worked. I had to learn how to get my life, finances, business, all of these types of things in order. And inside of that, I achieved lots of the things that I was actually looking to achieve. I created the business. I had, the BMW M3 I wanted. I had a penthouse. I was known in my industry. I was in the magazines, all those types of things. So achievement, I feel like, okay, cool. I'm getting it. And I mean, that felt good for a while, because really what we're working with there, which I've, come to understand at a deeper level after the fact, is that really the science of achievement is really about mastering from a kind of neurobiological level, is about mastering dopamine and norepinephrine. And I mean, you're an athlete, Fergus, you'll know about this. It's really learning how to like push your system beyond its current threshold. So like constantly pushing the system beyond what you feel you can take, progressive overload, and whether that be when you're running or in the gym. And dopamine, that you're constantly, pushing your last rep or your last race, you're improving your time a little bit and you're mastering dopamine. And I mean, it's a critical system for a biological being of which we are, to be able to master, to have, ability to have mastery over our reality in some ways. However, for me, that reached a point where it wasn't fulfilling. And because fulfillment is a completely different set of neurochemicals, it's oxytocin, serotonin. It's matters of the heart, which is why it falls more into like, spirituality and poetics and philosophy. It kind of moves into that category because what you're actually dealing with is relationship to self, relationship to inside of that means like relationship to what's really meaningful to you, what's impactful for you, what draws your interest very naturally. What do you actually care about? What are your values as a human being? And then it's also the relationship to yourself and others. So, the people you care for, that might be your wife, your partner, your friends, your community, animals, the planet, the world, it stretches out further and further. So, at that point in my life, I was reaching this thing of like, okay, cool. I've got everything I've wanted. And then I've set my mind on, but I forgot the heart. And that then led me on a journey. So it was a great teacher that, to create the type of life I wanted. It's not just about achieving things. It's also about doing things in such a way that allow me to be in relationship with myself, with life, with others in a way that brings me joy, brings me happiness, brings me, energy. And that was kind of the next leg of the journey, if you will. Where does spirituality fit into that for you? And what would you define spirituality as in a general sense? I mean, that's probably an hour podcast in itself. Spirituality for me, what I mean there, and this is going to be unique for everyone, is a relationship. For me, it's a relationship beyond self. It's a relationship to something higher than myself. And for some people, that could be nature. For some people, that could be the ocean. For some people, that could be God. For some people, that could be the universe. I think there's many ways that we can talk about the field or the connection between all things that has this whole life, this whole existence be here. And I mean, it's a philosophical explanation. And I think the challenge with this topic is it's better to be experienced. And, I think that's one of the beautiful things that's emerging in this time, whether it be through, altered states, whether it be through breath work, whether it be through the kind of rising popularity and, plant medicine work in terms of, psycho-spiritual development. I think these are giving us access to the fact that there are intelligences, there are forces beyond just our regular mind and biological system, that there are forces beyond this. And then for me, that is then coming into relationship with that broader view or broader intelligence. And at a very practical level, what that has then created for me is a deeper sense of care and connection, both for myself and the mistakes I've made, but also just a deeper sense of connection to other people and to nature and to animals. And I think if that's what spirituality does, and maybe it is all fundamentally made up, which I don't believe it is, there would still be a very practical application in terms of how that would improve our quality of life. Cynicism lies at the heart of spirituality as a word, I think, with a lot of people. I mean, I am not religious. I'd call myself agnostic, I think. I don't really know. But I studied theology and religion at university and left with more questions than answers, which I guess is the whole point, but didn't really feel like I had any answers along the way because by virtue of the course content, it very much became sort of academic dick measuring in terms of who could say the most convoluted thing in a different way to each other, and then I'd analyze it and submit it and be told, you got this grade, not really understanding any of what I'd said. So money well spent, education system, thank you. But nonetheless, it forced me to really reflect on, I think for me, some of the things, nature, oceans, scale. I think scale is what my brain cannot comprehend. I think the scale of the world, the scale of the stars, the scale of the universe just doesn't make sense to me at a real logical level. But there's no part of me that can marry up that lack of logic with conventional religious beliefs. I'm somewhere in the middle, whereby it's
It's a connection with something that is incomprehensible. And I guess that is the whole beauty of faith, quote unquote, is that you are believing in something that is not verifiable per se. And I do think that everybody's journey with that will evolve through family, through exposure to certain things, through traveling the world, through different cultures, different questions, different relationships falling apart, different relationships forming, etc. So going from the world that you were in with the fitness businesses, which I can perceive quite well, I think, because I think a lot of it was documented on YouTube, or I think I used the protein discount card at some point when I was about 15, buying my first protein. I actually, when you said that, I had an epiphany moment thinking, I can picture this website, interestingly. So I think I can understand what life was like back then for you, but you're obviously a very different person in terms of your interaction with the world. I think it's fair to say now than you were then. So what are the things that you believe you've consciously done along the way to pull out the answers to the questions that you are asking? And are those broadly applicable to others, or does everybody have their own journey?
I think everyone has their own journey. And I think there are some universal principles that apply and are useful. And I mean, I think we live in a time, just to kind of like map time out a little bit more, I think we live in a time in this moment where we have evolved over the last 350 years incredibly. I mean, over the last 350 years, we went from, I think in the States and in the UK, from being only 15% of people being literate with basic mathematics and English. I mean, there's still some people, I'm joking, but basic mathematics and English. And at this point, 99% of people in the UK and in America are literate in basic mathematics and English. And if someone doesn't have that, if a child doesn't have that as they're growing up, there would be an intervention, because what we're actually talking about there is the integration of a type of technology, the technology of thought and mind, which is what language and mathematics is. Now, the reason I say all of that is because we also live in a time which I believe we are learning and reintegrating a new skill set and how to human well, essentially. And by that, I mean, if we actually look at what we're doing here in terms of the overall happiness of us as a species, we would assume that the internet and greater technology and all these types of things would bring greater happiness and greater fulfillment. And it's not doing that for most people. It is for some, but it's not for most people. And in the Journal of Psychology America, they did a study where they found out that 75% of Americans are feeling stressed and overwhelmed on a monthly basis, and 52% of Americans are going to deal with mental illness at some point in their life. And the statistics for the UK are very similar. So then we have to look at, okay, cool. I mean, there's something up here. There's something that's not quite working in regards to creating lives that are going to allow for people to really flourish and to have good family systems and to have, children become, thriving members of communities and families and all of that good stuff. So then what my current hypothesis is, and many of my friends and mentors, is that we just haven't learned the skills of how to do that. And a part of this is I'm going to call it like this psycho-spiritual tech, meaning there's a psychological element to it, but there's also a spiritual element to it. And that these are actually technologies. And my experience of these is they are very much like technologies. I mean, meditation, we just think of it as sitting down and being calm. And from the teachers I've sat with, I mean, I was in Nepal a few months ago with one of the last Tibetan cave yogis, amongst some other great teachers in community. And it's a technology. We're talking about how to work with our hearts and minds and bodies in such a way that allow us to flourish, allow us to be able to master those neurochemicals I was speaking about before, learning how to concentrate and be a high performer, whether that be in your work or your career. But if you just do that alone, a huge aspect of your life is going to be missing, which is your kind of like serotonin, oxytocin, or if we're talking about spirit molecule, which would be DMT. And I mean, you can work with certain breath works and certain systems or other psychoactive compounds to release dimethyltryptamine, and you will have a spiritual experience. It's interlinked. And I mean, there's many different things we talk about there, but long story short, there are technologies out there that support us in being more functional human beings, to be happier human beings. And what I believe is happening in this moment, just like when you were 15, you got Pony discount card. I was telling people at that time that the fitness industry is about to boom. And it wasn't at that time. It was just beginning. I was like, everyone, including your nana, is going to be going to the gym soon. It's going to become like mainstream. And at the time, people were like, yeah, maybe. I'm having the exact same feeling and experience right now with inner work and inner technology. And I think we're seeing some of that with the rise in plant medicine and meditation and personal development. I mean, if you go on YouTube or Instagram, you can't hide from it. So I think we're in an early growth phase in regards to this as a new learning experience. And I think what we're learning how to do is how to put the blocks together in such a way that support us in thriving, removing the religious dogma from it all in such a way that allows people to come to their own understanding, as opposed to just having an intellectual concept of something, but actually coming into direct experience with deeper levels of themselves, with deeper connection with one another. And then you can broaden that out further into deeper connection with this planet that has birthed us. I think was it Alan Watts who said, apple trees, apple, planets, people. And so there's a deeper connection there that we also have to this planet. And I think all of those things begin to start to weave together. But as long as we're only talking about them conceptually, that's where they'll stay as a concept. And I think the what I see is emerging is like not just talking about going to the gym or doing a run. It's actually you got to put your shoes on and you got to get there. You got to get to the gym. You got to show up. And then you have an experience of what transformation through your body feels like. The same is true with inner technology. There's no use just us philosophizing about it. It's actually doing those inner practices that allow for you to begin to see in a very practical way how that starts to make you a better person. I mean, that's the simplest way to put it. It starts to make you a better person, maybe with more connection to your strength, your care, your compassion, your love, your heart. And then you see that weave into your life and you're like, oh my goodness, wow, this actually works. And then obviously it's like the gym or like running. You're like, okay, cool. I'm feeling more energized. I'm feeling a little stronger. Let's keep going. So I think that's what's happening in this moment.
I think people are viewing things less as tools for ends and more as experiences in and of themselves. I think running's probably the most readily available example at a global level, in the sense that New York Marathon's just had its highest participation ever. I think Berlin was the same. I think that's 2 back-to-back records at majors that have just been broken back-to-back in terms of participation. And just the general recreational boom with running is, I mean, it's kind of been booming for a while, but it really has boomed post-pandemic. And I think part of that is because people have discovered the merit to these things in and of themselves, rather than viewing them as means to an end. Because running traditionally used to be a way of increasing your energy expenditure to get leaner. People weren't even thinking about energy expenditure. They just associated running with fat loss, in the same way that a lot of people probably associate a lot of the boom that you're sensing, and I know the things that you're very well versed and practiced in, as tools to ends rather than experiences in and of themselves. And I think for me, my method to extract a lot of these things within training is long endurance events, zone 2 training. It's that sort of flow state space that I find myself in. The more intense, extreme, adverse environments I find myself in, the more spiritually connected to them I feel, and the more that I get as an individual out of those experiences, which is why I'm such a huge advocate for people to detach from 5K time, 10K time, half marathon time, road running only, and make that everything, because then you miss out on the utility of the thing that you're putting so much time and effort into, out with the time at the end of the road itself. So I think you're right. I think YouTube and Instagram and TikTok tells us so, that people are thinking much more consciously about these things. Where do you think that is coming from? Do you think it's post a very specific period of our lives from 2020 to 2022, give or take? Or do you think it's just a natural evolution? Or do you think yeah, what do you think is pushing people away from that religious dogma that you mentioned and more towards that introspective thinking, where I view the shift as being people are looking inwards to find what they're looking for rather than looking outwards to communities and groups and even, I guess, churches, all these representative things that people are looking outwards to attach themselves to find those things. People are looking inwards more. What do you think is driving that?
My sense, and just to touch on what you say, I completely agree in regards to practice, whether that be going to the gym or whether that be doing something for work or whether that be inner work, in regards to there being it not being a means to an end. I think that's an unskillful way to approach anything, because I think we're already in resistance to doing the thing at that point. And I mean, there's a whole host of stuff that's not super supportive with that mindset and frame. Equally, one of the things I was touching on there, I do also think there has to be, in order for something or someone to want to continue doing something, because we are biological organisms, that it also has to make sense, right? Like, you're getting incredible experience out of your running, not just because, in fact, you've transcended the fact that it's the kind of means to end 5K, 10K timing, because what you've actually found, what I'm hearing, is when you kind of let go of that and fully immerse yourself in the experience, in the presence of the experience, that things start to open up for you in such a way that transcends and includes the former. So it becomes as you said, a spiritual experience. It becomes something that's deeply connective, which is your kind of serotonin, oxytocin. But if you're in a difficult environment, you've probably got dopamine, norepinephrine. You're just in this like heightened connected state as you're doing it. And I would argue, just for like inner practice, it's like, yes, the same there too. And I also look to the benefits that come from that. I mean, there are real benefits from being fit and active in your life. And there are real benefits from having the capacity to be able to regulate your own nervous system, to be able to be with what's arising in your experience too. As you said before, people are turning inwards for wisdom. And my sense of the reason that that's happening is because we've come to learn as a species and as individuals that the government and what they've kind of set up for, whether it be the English dream or the American dream, doesn't necessarily create the type of life that we want and or brings us what we're kind of looking for as human beings. Because why? Well, we're not just beings of achievement, which is what most corporations and companies want us to do, is to achieve specific outcomes for their means, which of course will not lead to life satisfaction. So then we have to start asking deeper questions as we're in that kind of dissatisfied state. Going back to earlier in the podcast, like where I was when I was kind of 25, you then naturally start to ask deeper questions. And I think these are a part of our very natural kind of psycho-spiritual development. And if you look at any of the psychologists and thinkers who kind of mapped human development, from Erik Erikson to Piaget to Ken Wilber to Claire Graves with spiral dynamics to Terry O'Fallon with her stages model. I mean, they've been mapped really clearly by multiple different people. And there's common themes amongst all of them. We could put all of these maps up on the screen in front of us, or you could kind of go look them up, and you're looking at the same thing essentially from a slightly different lens. So inside of that, what that means is that there begins to become patterns that we go through as individuals that start to have us ask different questions about ourselves, life, the world, nature, the universe. And as we go through those, we master one, then we recognize as another. It's like when we're at school, there are certain things you do in year 7 and 8 that you don't do in year 11 or 12. And once you've got those down, you move on to the next ones because you start asking different questions. So the same happens as we grow. I mean, the challenge that we have is that in the West, predominantly, we live inside of Piaget's model because he was buddies with Freud. So in terms of like the predominant thinking in Western culture is that we kind of grow up when we're 21. And that's the end, because that's where he stopped his work. It wasn't that he was actually saying that's where it's finished. He just stopped his work there. And many people have continued onwards. So yeah, we do continue growing, obviously beyond age 21. And I think that's what we're coming to realize, is that, you know, it's not just about achievement. There are other aspects to life as well. And I think as we come up against the challenge of each developmental stage, we start to ask new questions. And it's almost like inside of that, it's like the obstacle is the way. It was my unfulfillment that led to fulfillment. It was my disconnection, disorganization that led to my organization, right? Like getting my life together. So inside of each life challenge that I was in was the exact opposite in terms of like what it was here to teach me. And I think all of us in different parts of our lives, myself included in this moment, we're in a life phase, and there are certain things inside of each life phase come with challenges, and they also come with gifts. And it's just moving through, my senses were just all moving through different life phases. None better or worse, it's just different life phases.
If somebody's unfulfilled in their life currently, even better if they're listening, I guess, what questions would you encourage them to be asking themselves?
Well, the first is the opposite. So what is it that brings you happiness? What is it that brings you joy? What do you love doing? And not in a way that's just like for you, but I mean, you can't do something that's just for you. I mean, you could be playing video games for you. If you go wholeheartedly all the way into that, very quickly it's going to be for others. It's going to be interesting for other people, because either you'll be playing video games on Twitch and people will be watching you, or you'll be helping other people improve their video game abilities. I mean, this could be anything. And I'm sharing that as an analogy because it's just so ridiculous that that's actually a profession. So it's just like blows it up, right? We can literally do anything.
It's the trap I've fallen into massively with my own. Well, it's not a trap per se, but I've built a business around the thing that I love, which is strength and endurance training. And now I'm at a point where actually it's a little bit more blurry, where I can extract my own enjoyment from the thing that I love doing, because there's so many commercial ties to a lot of what I'm doing. So yeah, absolutely agreed on that.
So yeah, as you're pointing out, so the first piece would be asking them the question, like, what brings you fulfillment? What builds you happiness? And that might change as time goes on. And then as you're in moments where something was happy and fulfilling and then it starts to change, then again, there's the opportunity for us to then look at, okay, cool. What's the new lesson? What's the growth point in here? Because it's from that discomfort. It's from the feeling and the sensation of unfulfillment that can then guide us and give us enough discomfort, if you will, to have us begin to ask bigger questions, to have us really look at, okay, cool, like what actually brings me fulfillment? What actually do I love doing? And for some people, it's just we've been conditioned the fuck out of finding the things that we love doing. I mean, from a child, we've been put into schools doing things that you don't love and that you're told to do is whatever environments you've grown up in. Sometimes we just lose connection to that. And then inside of that, we deal with another challenge, is that we can be kind of disconnected from our own deeper selves, our own kind of core selves, through conditioning and or through kind of traumatic experience, where if, like, for example, I mean, I work with lots of high performing people and successful people, and still they might struggle with self-expression. You know, maybe to take their business to the next level or their life to the next level, they need to be able to express more freely. And maybe even to take the relationship to the next level, they need to create deeper levels of intimacy, which requires expression. Now, if any of those things were punished and or shunned as a child, we can create belief systems, and beliefs are psychoactive. I mean, that's a good thing for runners and high performers to understand and get to grips with as well, is like beliefs are psychoactive, right? So you then start creating beliefs around yourself. Well, what are beliefs? Well, beliefs are ingrained thoughts that get fused to an identity structure, which is like who we believe we are, which is also why when you go running and you see a vast expansive view, we start to move out of our individual identity, which is where the spiritual experiences start to happen and wisdom emerges, is because we move into a wider view. That could be looking at a sunset. That could be in a breathwork ceremony. That could be walking in the streets of London, maybe. But that wider view, that beyond our just individual self perspective, that then opens us up to something new emerging, a transformation emerging, a new belief emerging, beginning to see through the constructs of what we have created for ourselves, to then begin to recognize that we can create something new, which is also, that's the beginning of a growth mindset. So inside of that, you know, beliefs being psychoactive, you know, recognizing that we're constantly creating our identities, right? So we're constantly in a state of transcending and including, hopefully, previous states of our development and our life in such a way that makes us become even more of who we are. and, you know, thriving in your career. And then you get to a point where, okay, cool, now you've got to repivot. And then you get to be in a new discovery phase. And inside of that, it's not just aligning where it is that we want to go in terms of fulfillment. It's also recognizing, you know, maybe what do I need to let go of in terms of certain beliefs and certain behaviors and certain patterns. And then how do I then begin to then kind of let those structures go so that I can form something that's going to be more supportive for my life? And I mean, that really right there is kind of the process of any transformational process, is recognizing where we are right now, recognizing where we want to go, recognizing the kind of gifts of this moment and also the challenges, and then being able to broaden our perspective in such a way that allows us to then align our beliefs and our behaviors with the next stage of our development, which will then begin to unfold. So, I mean, every inner tool leads us essentially to that same place. And I mean, you could get the same experience from, you know, going on a run with you in the mountains and letting go of the time clock, expanding into a wider view and perspective in that moment, recognizing, okay, cool, this is where I need to go in my life now, moving out of that fixed identity and then moving into, okay, cool, this is where I can go. And I mean, we could add stuff onto that, like surround yourself with people who are doing the same thing. So if you're unfulfilled, remove everyone on your Instagram or social media account or YouTube who looks like they're living an unfulfilling life, and only follow people that you think, based on your belief system, are living fulfilling lives. And I mean, getting around people is also a super easy way to change our identity and to begin to access new beliefs and possibilities, because it's the equivalent of taking an 8-year-old in school. What would happen if you took an 8-year-old and you put them in a great group of 12-year-olds for 6 months?
They'd improve dramatically. They'd learn, but I guess socially there'd be some evolution that would put them a few years ahead of other 8-year-olds, because by virtue of spending time with people older than them, they would have access to things that are reflective of being older and therefore more mature. So the 8-year-old would by default become a 12-year-old, but not legally.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, exactly that. I mean, that's it. So just like knowing that, and I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone listening would have in their heads kind of said the same thing as you were tracking it. So knowing that, it's the same for other areas of our development. You know, if you want to become an awesome runner, you know, hang around with, you know, Fergus and your crew. If, you know, you want to find fulfillment, find other people who are living fulfilling lives and just get them into your field. And you're going to learn from the ways that they've learned. You're going to become immersed in their perspectives, and eventually that's going to start having an impact on you.
We've touched on it a little bit already, but you've lived in you grew up in the UK and you've lived in LA and spent a lot of time in the States. What do we get wrong? Because there's a lot of barriers to us getting this right. Everything you've just discussed is at odds with, as you said, the English or the American dream, but we have a lot more power over, as I'm sure you'll agree, we have a lot more power over ourselves than we might give ourselves credit for, because we are so used to convention. But from your perspective, you're in Costa Rica now. I know you've been in different parts of the world. There'll be a reason for that. That won't just be, oh, it's a nice climate. That's the obvious one. But it's not as simple as that, I'm sure. What do the US and the UK get wrong? And I guess, are there any differences between the two that we can learn from? Because we were talking beforehand, I get a huge amount of value from spending time with Americans, in the same way I get a huge amount of value from spending time with people in certain parts of the UK and things like that. But there are definite threads of DNA that run through people's mindsets, perceptions, beliefs, self-limiting beliefs, opportunity, so many things that are at play. What do you think we can improve on in general in the rather large and diverse nations of those two things that I've given you? So an impossible question, but yeah, we'll see where we land.
I appreciate it, an impossible question. It's a great exploration. As you're sharing that, you know, what I sense is similar to what I was talking about before, and that's the thing that I think we miss both in I'll just say the West in general, is that, you know, we've put an overemphasis on external, and I'm not against external, just to be super clear. I mean, a nice home, a nice view, you know, nice car, you know, nice things. They're really beautiful. But I think, again, the emphasis on achievement is something that deeply focused on in the West. We have not focused, for obvious reasons, on fulfillment, because based on our industrial model, if we focus on fulfillment in the short term, it would not be good for GBT. It would not be good for economic growth. It just wouldn't, right? It's obvious we need people to fill certain positions. Therefore, building in systems that have people, focus on what's fulfilling for them hasn't been just built into this model, because that's not where we were in terms of our evolution as a species, as a culture, as a civilization. It's just not where we were. So I think we still have an overemphasis on, external things bringing us what we want and what we need, as opposed to a more balanced view, which is what I hold, which is recognizing that there are interior landscapes to explore, of which we come into deeper relationship with ourselves and the world. And for me, the sweet spot is the in between the two, recognizing that it's not just about the internal and it's not just about the external. It's somewhere exactly in between. It's how can I be in a relationship with myself in such a deep way that it fosters deeper connection with others? How can I be in a deeper relationship with myself in such a way that it fosters me to be doing things that I love doing? And in the pursuit of doing those things that I love, very naturally brings other people value and joy. So that view is very different. Like, that's not where most people are living, because we're living inside of slightly different structures. So for me, how I value and view success is different to what I did a decade ago. I mean, a decade ago, I would have looked at things as, from a more status perspective. I'm not saying status isn't anything, but what I view as successful now is like someone, it's much more subtle. I'm like someone who has great relationships with their children and their wife and are doing something that they deeply love doing. And maybe inside of that, because they love doing it, maybe it does bring, financial rewards and success. But again, it comes back to what you were sharing before. It's not a means to an end, but for the pursuit itself, So I think that's the view that we're missing in the West. Yeah.
I agree. I think that's the thing that's given me most happiness and fulfillment. And the thing I always try and hold on to is, if I'm not enjoying the process of something, then I'm in the fortunate position where I can pivot a little bit on trying to avoid just getting stuck in that way, because it's very easy to blink and, I've been doing something I hate for 3 years. And actually it's becoming even more and more difficult for means to become ends, because more and more barriers are presenting themselves, geopolitical, economic things at play that we're not going to rabbit hole down. But yeah, it's in terms of economic growth, opportunity, there's a lot of things that mean that people are disincentivized from finding a way of creating an end, which means that there's no enjoyment at the end, nor the means, which is not a good place to be. And I think, again, in my world and your former world, there is so much emphasis on the times, the lifts, the comparison, the subtle competition that misses the point of the 16 weeks that it took you to get those things are what matters, not those things themselves. Because at the end of the day, and I say this a lot now, the only people that really care about your 5K time, unless it's how you make a living and you're in the Diamond League, are you and your mum. And even your mum probably doesn't really care that much, let's be honest. So I think that's what I've discovered through my way of training, and what frustrates me a lot about the modern world of social media is this silent competition of who's doing the arbitrary, non-measurable thing the best, when in reality, I'm of the opinion that if you're playing that game, you've already lost, because there is nothing to be won other than enjoying the process of going through those things in and of themselves, day to day, week to week. And I struggle to differentiate achievement, trackable metrics and things like that from that. But I think view on those things and how do they feed into fulfillment for yourself and others? How can they be used? I mean, it's even things like cars are a great example. I'm of the opinion that buying a car to impress other people is fucking stupid, because they're depreciating assets and nobody really cares. Again, like, people will look at the car, not the driver, and it might give you a little bit of a buzz, but it's not gonna stay with you for that long. But if you giggle like a child when you downshift, you appreciate engineering, you are really, really bought into meeting other people through the childishness of vroom vroom, and you can make friends, you can go on experiences, you can visit new places, and you can do things, and it becomes a tool for enjoyment, then joy is priceless. And those are two very, very different things. Whereas the Huracan, so you can be seen as the person with the Huracan and known as the person with the supercar, is stupid, but having it because it's something that gives you joy and allows you to meet new people, explore new places, they're very different things. And I think that's the distinction that people need to consider a little bit more based on conversations I've been having recently. And I think that very much aligns with a lot of what you just said. So leadership is something that you spend a lot of time discussing, and I know you work with people on exactly that. And conscientious or conscious leadership, I guess, is a core component of a lot of what you talk about. What allows somebody to become a conscious leader? What is the work that they need to do to not become an unconscious leader? Because I'm assuming that the reason that you refer to conscious leadership is because it's very easy to sleepwalk through conventional ways and patterns of doing things that mean that people might not be the best versions of themselves and therefore the best leaders that they can become in their individual setting. So what do you want to cultivate with conscious leadership?
I think what you're talking about there. Well, let's first define what is unconscious leadership. What would you say that is?
I'd say that's middle management in the Western world, to be cynical. But I'd describe that as doing the things that we have seen or believe other people to do to tick boxes to feel like we have led. Whereas I think conscious leadership, on the flip side, whether you're going to ask me the question or not, I'm just going to go with it, is understanding the context and the circumstances in which you are leading and addressing them on their own merits through deductive reasoning, empathetic thinking, individual understanding, and acknowledging that no one situation is the same. But at the core of all that are transferable skills that can be applied to different contexts or circumstances.
Beautifully put. I mean, I don't have to say anything. I could just add on to the back of that. And I think the thing that was coming up as you were sharing is just like the key differences is awareness. One has greater awareness, which means understanding the context you're in as a human being. I mean, we're all leaders. There is no some other leader. We're all leaders in varying degrees in our lives, in just different contexts. So we're all leading. And it's just, are we aware of the context that we are in? And do we have capacity to support others inside of that? Because that's fundamentally what leadership is. In such a way that supports the other person to flourish, to become greater in the field upon which you're leading in. So if you're leading in the space of fitness, then you would be supporting other people to become greater at their fitness pursuits. If you're supporting people in the lane of business, then you would be supporting people to achieve the mutual aligned interests in regards to whatever those business goals are, in such a way that fosters deeper connection and collaboration. Because the reason that we are the most popular species on planet Earth is because we are the greatest at cooperation, and that's what ultimately separated us from the saber-toothed tiger. We were better at cooperating than animals much more ferocious and powerful than us as individuals, but together we are much stronger. So it's recognizing that and then having greater levels of awareness around self and other. So this is where the awareness can keep expanding, right? Your awareness can expand in any field. But when it comes to the way that I support leaders is recognizing coming into a deeper relationship with yourself then allows you to foster deeper levels of relationship with other. If I don't have deep levels of empathy for where I fucked up in life, if you share something with me, Fergus, where you fucked up and I'm judging myself for how I fucked up, what am I going to do to you?
Judge, vice versa.
Yeah, right. So it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Whereas if I can have deeper compassion for myself, if I have a deeper level of passion for things that I'm interested in my life, if I have developed certain skills and, in both interior and exterior skills, then they give me then the capacity to then be able to give that to other people. But I cannot give something that I do not have. It's physically impossible. And most leadership that we're seeing in corporations in the West are mostly coming from people who are in jobs that they don't love doing and are in a life that they don't love and don't have the types of relationships that will create a kind of supportive, fulfilling life. Therefore, they come to work miserable and then they take it out on their employees. I mean, that's mostly what's happening. And therefore, then that impacts the employees. They then go home and maybe they were okay, but now they're just having a terrible time at work. That then impacts their relationship. And it's just this like whole downward spiral. As opposed to having people in positions who have greater levels of, empathy and understanding about themselves, the context they're in, other people, the world situation that we're in right now. And then having people in positions of leadership that are not there just because they have more power in terms of financial or physical, and that they're not necessarily coming from a place of power over, but coming from a place of like power with, and coming from a place of collaboration and mutual support and upliftment versus, some type of ego trip and putting people into positions of power that have the most competency as opposed to the most financial or physical resources. And I mean, that's really where we thrive, right? Like that's what we want. That's a healthy system where competency rises, and what we want to do and what we hope is happening. And I think potentially with financial markets and everything in the way the world's going is we're beginning to democratize many different things from external technology. I mean, we all have an iPhone or Android in our pocket that is more powerful than a computer that the president would have had in the 1970s. So we have this incredible technology all in our pockets, access to all of the information that we need now. The financial system seemed to be democratizing with kind of the whole DeFi and crypto space. So then inside of that, the next type of technology, which I believe is coming online, which has been a thread and a theme throughout this whole conversation, is the inner technologies. And you pair all of those things together, we start to have greater levels of internal sovereignty. So we can start to lead in our own lives, make financial choices in our own lives that are empowered, have an internal sense of security, love, and trust within ourselves, internal sovereignty, to be able to deal with situations as they're arising in our lives, that we don't need other people, but we choose other people. Because that's the foundation for any healthy relationship. If I need a job, I'm probably not going to bring my best self and you're not going to get the best from me. If I choose a job, different. If I need a relationship, it's probably going to fall apart. If I choose a relationship, it has the capacity to flourish. So I think the first piece here is learning really how to lead ourselves and then create systems which allow for greater levels of sovereignty and competency to rise.
I think the best thing about consciously becoming more self-aware is the downstream effect it can have on others around us, and therefore the net effect of that compounded over time with society as a whole. If you can directly impact your immediate circle through consciously making a change, and that leads to them consciously making a change, the net result of that over time should be very positive. However, that can be difficult given that it's a ever changing, evolving mainstream media driven world. But I think that's framing it as an opportunity is something I always like to do, because the journey and discovery I've gone on through my own self-awareness and understanding what is fulfilling to me versus what I believe that to be through conventional wisdom and guidance has allowed me to, I believe, have more of a positive impact on those that I care about in my own life. And that is a source of fulfillment and happiness for me, which means that everything suddenly becomes cyclical, whereas previously I was kind of bashing my head and going the other way and bashing my head and going the other way. So I think that's where success, happiness, and fulfillment can begin to compound, but it only begins with one decision to make a change like you did when you were 19. And obviously there's been a lot of evolution and learning along the way, and I think patience is at the core of all this, is that patience is the thing that will unlock the learning. Doing the time and doing the reps is what will present the lessons. So if you were to give somebody skeptical, or somebody that's struggling, or somebody that isn't in any way, shape or form connected with their inner technologies, one bit of advice to finish things off, what would it be?
I was thinking about this as you were sharing before. Curiosity would just be to be really curious and to cultivate the quality of curiosity. Because I think that itself as a principle and as a way of being then leads us to emergent discovery. And that curiosity could be, get really curious about your skepticism. Why is it here? What does it serve? Where's it coming from? And you can follow that train. I mean, I've worked deeply on my own skepticism, my own doubt, my own fears. And I mean, if you just get curious about what they are and how they're a part of you and maybe where they're coming from and how they were formed, you start to come to deeper levels of understanding and wisdom. And from there, everything starts to open up. So don't listen to me or don't listen to anyone. Or don't listen to Fergus, but you should listen to Fergus sometimes. But don't listen to other people, right? It's like, I think we all have the answers inside. And if you get curious as a quality, those answers will begin to reveal themselves to you. Maybe what that next move is for you. No one's going to know what that is. Your mom, your dad, your friends, no one really, your partner, your wife, your spouse isn't going to know. It's really within you. You know, we have deeper levels of wisdom and intelligence within us. And ultimately it's our responsibility to become sovereign in our lives, to create happiness, fulfillment, and to make that choice. And anything between you and that life, my invitation would be to get curious about.
Agreed. It's one of my favorite words. And ultimately what guides a lot of my decision making these days is what makes me curious, pull on that thread, make the rest up as I go along. And I'll have a good time. That's the aim. That's the aim.
Right there with you.
Rick, really enjoyed that. Thank you very much. Where is the best place for people to find you?
Best place to find me, my website, ultimately everything's on there, which is rickwilliam.com. Instagram, I am Rick William. And then YouTube, if you just search, if you're on YouTube, Rick William, kind of my stuff will come up on there. But it's been an absolute pleasure, Fergus. I really appreciate the work you're putting out there. And it's been a pleasure having a conversation with you here today.
No, thank you very much. Likewise, really enjoyed that. And we'll speak very soon.
Thank you, brother.